In 1987, the bodies of these 14 people were discovered inside the home of Ronald Gene Simmons. But the nightmare didn't end there. What followed became one of the most shocking and haunting massacres in Arkansas history.
In Arkansas, investigators continue to look into one of the nation's worst cases of mass murder.
Ronald Gene Simmons was already known for being violent, but nothing prepared anyone for the horrifying truths that would shake Arkansas from 1987 all the way to today. And when I say haunting, I mean every single detail is chilling. So if stories about incest, abuse, and murder aren't your thing, you might want to think twice, because this is one case you will never forget.
He looked at me with that gun and pointed that gun on me. He had this just horrid grin on his face. And he looked mad. He just looked mad, and like a mad dog would look at you.
A mad dog, a recluse, a weirdo, and a nice guy. All descriptions of this man. So far, Gene Simmons has said nothing to police, showed no emotion, except at the mention of family.
Long before the headlines, before the horror that would shock the country, there was just a boy, angry, restless, and already on a path that no one could have predicted. Ronald Gene Simmons wasn't born a monster, but life certainly didn't hand him peace. He came into the world on July 15, 1940, in Chicago, Illinois, during a time of war and change. But it didn't take long for things to fall apart. When Ronald was just a toddler, tragedy struck. His father, William Simmons, died suddenly of a stroke. A devastating loss like that can shake any child, but Ronald didn't get much time to grieve. Within a year, his mother remarried. Her new husband, William D. Griffin, worked as a civil engineer for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That meant one thing: constant moving. The family bounced from town to town across Arkansas, never settling long enough for Ronald to make friends or feel grounded. To a young boy craving stability, these never-ending changes planted seeds of frustration, loneliness, and rage. He never quite fit in. He was the new kid too many times to count. Eventually, he gave up on trying. Instead of making connections, Ronald turned cold. He lashed out at classmates and earned a reputation as a bully. Teachers couldn't handle him. Students avoided him. By his teens, his home life was just as rocky. His behavior spiraled, and no matter how hard his parents tried, whether it was strict rules or desperate guidance, nothing stuck. Ronald was out of control, so at 16, his parents made a last-ditch move. They enrolled him in military school, hoping structure would do what they couldn't. Surprisingly, it worked. The harsh rules, the discipline, the chain of command. It gave Ronald something he lacked his entire life: control. For once, he followed the rules, maybe not because he believed in them, but because they gave him power. When he graduated on September 15, 1957, the military felt like the next logical step. So, without hesitation, he enlisted in the United States Navy. His first post was at Naval Station Bremerton in Washington, where something unexpected happened. He met someone. Her name was Rebecca Becky Ulibarri. Maybe he saw in her the kind of stability he never had, or maybe it was just another thing he wanted to control. Either way, the relationship moved fast. On July 9, 1960, the two tied the knot in New Mexico, and just like that, Ronald began a new chapter. At first glance, Ronald and Becky might have looked like your average military couple, married young, raising a growing family, moving with the flow of duty. But inside their home, a much darker story was unfolding. The man Becky had married was not the same man she now lived with. The longer he wore the uniform, the more rigid, controlling, and unrelenting he became. Ronald demanded absolute perfection. He wasn't just strict, he was obsessive. The house had to be spotless at all times. Becky's appearance had to be exactly the way he wanted it. From her clothes to the way she styled her hair, everything was under his thumb. And so, for 18 long and painful years, Becky stayed. Together they had 9 children: Ronald Gene Simmons Jr., Sheila Simmons, William Billy Simmons, Loretta Simmons, Eddie Simmons, Marianne Simmons, Rebecca Simmons. Now, after leaving the Navy in 1963, he didn't slow down. He joined the United States Air Force a couple of years later, but the uniform couldn't fix what was broken. His temper was volcanic, and his obsession with power only grew. What started as cruelty toward Becky eventually turned into something even more disturbing. He extended that same brutality to his children. He didn't discipline them, he ruled them. Every task had to be done his way, and if it wasn't, the punishment was swift and terrifying. Ronald saw any form of defiance, no matter how small, as betrayal. He didn't guide his kids, he dominated them. His house wasn't a home. It was a prison where he held the keys. But amid all the terror, one child seemed to get special treatment: his daughter Sheila. At first, it looked like favoritism. Ronald spent more time with her, gave her more freedom, more privileges. But it didn't take long for that favoritism to feel off. Too close, too intense, too unnatural. And then came the day no one could ever forget. He called a family meeting, stood in front of everyone with the coldness of a man announcing the weather, and dropped a bomb that shattered what little was left of their family. Sheila was pregnant, and Ronald was the father. There was no shame in his voice, no guilt, no hesitation. He declared that Sheila would carry the child to term, raise it in their home, and that everyone in the family was expected to accept it, just like that. As if this wasn't horrifying, as if incest and abuse were just facts of life under his roof. Becky said nothing. She had been emotionally destroyed over the years, beaten down so badly she couldn't even find her voice. But someone else in the family did speak up. Ronald Jr., Sheila's older brother, couldn't stay silent. He was disgusted and terrified, and he took action the moment he could. He went straight to his sister's school and told a counselor everything. At first, Sheila denied it all, said she wasn't pregnant, that nothing happened. But the school staff knew something wasn't right. They kept digging, kept asking, and after nearly a month, Sheila broke. Through tears and unbearable shame, she finally confessed the truth. Her own father had gotten her pregnant. And here's where things take an even darker turn. Ronald wasn't just some abusive man hiding in the shadows. He was a decorated military veteran with over 2 decades of service. He had earned honors like the Air Force Ribbon for excellent marksmanship, the Vietnam Gallantry Cross, and even the Bronze Star Medal, a medal given for heroism and meritorious service. On November 30th, 1979, he left the Air Force with the rank of Master Sergeant. To the outside world, he looked like a war hero, but beneath that shiny surface was a man who had built a kingdom of terror inside his own home. And that kingdom was about to fall apart. The first real breakthrough came when the Department of Human Services in Cloudcroft, New Mexico, launched an official investigation on April 3rd, 1981. But instead of facing the music, Ronald did what so many cowards do. He ran. Ronald first fled with his family to Ward, Arkansas. By the end of September, on the 30th to be exact, he landed a temporary gig as a filing clerk in the Medical Records Department at the John L. McClellan Memorial Veterans Hospital in North Little Rock. Just a few months later, on January 10th of 1982, he managed to snag a permanent position as a personnel clerk at the 5th Army Medical Recruiting Battalion in Little Rock. But while Ronald tried to blend into a new life, his home was slowly falling apart. His son William wanted nothing to do with the move and stayed back in New Mexico with his high school friends. And Becky? After the incest accusations surfaced, she was done. Emotionally checked out and no longer sharing a bed with Ronald. Still in Ward, Ronald did the unthinkable again. He got his daughter Sheila pregnant for the second time. The pregnancy didn't go to term. In early 1983, it was terminated by Dr. Chu Ai-tan in Dermot. Then, on June 12th of that same year, the family bought a small, isolated farm, too far from Little Rock to commute, as Ronald put it. It was 14 acres of rough land in Pope County, a little over 6 miles north of Dover. They called it Mockingbird Hill, a name that would come to haunt them. Ronald quit his recruiting job that August and retreated into their new hideout, far from society's eyes. Part of the reason for the move, Sheila had started seeing a young guy named Dennis McNulty, whom she met at the Draffon School of Business. She was studying to be a secretary, and Dennis was into radio communications. The distance didn't scare Dennis one bit. He regularly made the grueling 170-mile round trips to see her, determined to keep their relationship alive despite the family's eerie isolation. Mockingbird Hill sat on a low ridge near Arkansas Highway 7 in the tiny blink-and-you'll-miss-it community of Pleasant Grove. The surroundings? A church, a graveyard, a corner store, and a campground. Bare bones, just how Ronald liked it. Within 2 days of moving in, he hammered a no trespassing sign into the dirt and started wrapping the property in barbed wire, cutting his family off from the outside world. Their home was a 5-bedroom mobile unit, with 2 extra rooms squeezed under an extended roof. The living room was cozy enough with its fireplace, but everything else, from the kitchen to the bedrooms, was tight and cramped. The heating and AC, basically non-existent. They had a single wood-burning stove for warmth, and only one window unit to battle the summer heat. There was a phone on the property, but Ronald refused to let anyone hook it up. No calls in, no calls out. He wanted full control. The plumbing was a joke, too. No working bathrooms inside, just 2 outhouses outside. To make matters even weirder, Ronald built a tall, makeshift privacy fence around the place. Some parts of it shot up 10 feet high. And just before Christmas, he told the family to dig a new privy pit in the yard. What they didn't know then was that this pit would become a grave for secrets far darker than they could imagine. Meanwhile, William was trying to patch things up with his estranged wife, Wilma. The plan was to have their 3-year-old daughter, Barbara, stay at Mockingbird Hill temporarily while he and Wilma figured things out. They were even planning to remarry in February of 1988. William arrived at the farm on December 21st, but Wilma had to stay behind in New Mexico for Christmas. Money was too tight for the trip. Back at the farm, Ronald had become a shadow of himself, sinking deeper into isolation. He locked himself away in his bedroom, his private chamber that no one, not even Becky, dared enter. Her sister, Edith Nesby, would later recall that Ronald kept the door locked whether he was inside or not. He was quiet, stingy, and had a dead-eyed stare that could freeze a person in their tracks. Even his kids were afraid of him. He made them do pointless, punishing tasks, like hauling 5-gallon buckets of dirt up steep hills for no reason. 17-year-old Loretta once told a classmate her father was just a drunken bum, always gripping a beer, always disappearing into that foul-smelling room no one else could enter. Now, as mentioned earlier, Ronald was once a force to be reckoned with, thanks to his military achievements. But when he entered civilian life, he found himself taking lowly jobs that bruised his ego. Then, by some twist of fate, he landed a clerk position at a local legal office. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually pull himself together. His punctuality and rigid discipline impressed the higher-ups. But underneath that well-dressed surface, the same darkness lingered, and it exploded when he made unwanted sexually charged advances toward a female co-worker. The illusion shattered. Thankfully, the woman had the courage to speak up. Ronald was fired on the spot. But instead of facing the consequences, he rewrote the story in his mind, convincing himself he was the victim, that he was entitled to a woman's attention, and that women were out to destroy him. To Ronald, women weren't people. They were objects, to control or to discard. Not long after, he found another job at Woodline Motor Freight Company. He promised himself he'd behave, especially around female co-workers. Outwardly, he kept his distance. Inwardly, his resentment festered. He despised women. He despised the civilian world. He missed the strict rules and rank of the military, the instant respect, the control. Now he was just another nobody in a town that didn't know his name, answering to people he didn't respect, and worse, couldn't control. And then came Joyce Elaine Butts, his new boss. A woman. For Ronald, this was intolerable. Taking orders from a woman who wasn't afraid of him drove him into a rage. He became openly insubordinate and downright hostile. It didn't take long before he was fired again. But in his twisted mind, he still wasn't the problem. He blamed the women of Arkansas for his downfall, believing they were sabotaging him out of spite. He never stopped to consider that maybe it was his own hatred and violence that drove people away. By then, the once bustling Simmons household was beginning to thin out. The kids were growing up and leaving. Jean, the eldest, had married and moved out before the family even left New Mexico. Sheila, who had survived years of unspeakable trauma under Ronald's roof, had also married and was raising her daughter Sylvia, the child fathered by her own father. William had secured a managerial job at Hardee's and married Renata May, building a new life in Fordyce. Loretta, a brilliant honors student, was nearing graduation. Her diary and whispered admissions revealed a single dream: escape. Everyone could see it in her eyes. She was counting down the days. But Christmas was around the corner, and for Ronald Simmons, that wasn't a time for joy. It was an opportunity. Becky Simmons had sent out cards that December, stuffing them with handwritten letters filled with excitement. Her entire family would finally be together, all the kids, all the grandkids under one roof. It was meant to be a real celebration. But while Becky envisioned joy, Ronald had already begun planning something far more sinister. Weeks before the holiday, he ordered his children to dig a wide, deep hole in the backyard. He told them it was for a new outhouse. Nobody asked questions. But that hole wasn't for a toilet. It was a grave. And on December 22nd, just before Christmas, Ronald made his move. The house was quiet when his first victim arrived. His eldest son, Ronald Gene Simmons, Jr. This was the same son who had allegedly reported the disturbing situation between Sheila and their father to the school counselor. And without any warning, Ronald struck Gene square in the forehead with a crowbar, hard and fast. But he didn't stop there. Fueled by uncontrollable rage, Ronald kept pounding, smashing Gene's face until his nose was shattered. Then, to make absolutely sure there was no chance of survival, he delivered one final brutal blow to his son's skull. And if that wasn't enough, Ronald stomped on Gene's groin, confirming his son was completely unresponsive. Some say Ronald's savage attack wasn't just blind fury. It was cold, calculated revenge. After all, Gene was the one who had exposed his father's monstrous secret to the school. Now Becky heard the terrifying sounds of the beatings echoing through the house and cautiously moved to check what was happening. But Ronald, always alert to any interruption, heard her footsteps and quickly hid in the shadows. When Becky stumbled upon the horrifying sight of her son drenched in blood, shock overwhelmed her. She was so distraught she didn't even notice Ronald creeping behind her. Before she could react, Ronald swung the crowbar with brutal force across her shoulders, knocking her to the floor. His eyes burned with a dark, vengeful fire. He blamed Becky for the rebellion of his children, seeing her as the root of his family's collapse. As Becky scrambled on the ground, desperate to escape, Ronald struck her again and again, breaking ribs with each merciless blow. Determined to inflict as much pain as possible, he turned the jagged teeth of the crowbar against her flesh, tearing away chunks of skin. By the time he finished, Becky was lifeless, but Ronald wasn't satisfied. To be certain, he pulled out a .22 caliber pistol and fired a final shot into the back of her head. The gunshot jolted 3-year-old Barbara, Ronald's granddaughter and the daughter of Gene Jr., awake. She began crying, small, frightened sobs that soon grew wearying to Ronald. Concealing the pistol behind his back, he entered her room, pretending to comfort her. His arms wrapped around her, but then they tightened around her neck. His hands squeezed mercilessly, cutting off the last desperate gasp of breath from Barbara's tiny body. Cold and methodical, Ronald dragged the bodies of those he had slain to the cesspit, the same one he had forced the children to dig when they first moved to the isolated property. Barbara had wet herself out of fear as she was choked to death. Ronald placed her body in a garbage bag and dumped it beside her grandmother's. To ensure no scavenging animals would disturb the grim scene, he wrapped barbed wire around the cesspit's perimeter. Finally, he doused the corpses with kerosene, masking the nauseating stench of decay with a temporary barrier. According to reports, Ronald's next victim was his 17-year-old daughter, Loretta. Her striking resemblance to Sheila, the daughter who had betrayed him, stirred a violent rage within him. He dragged Loretta into the living room, shoving her face into a barrel of ice-cold water. She fought with desperate strength, but Ronald's grip was unyielding. When she finally went still, he carried her lifeless body to the cesspit with the others. The remaining 3 children, Eddie, Marianne, and Becky, met the same grim fate, killed and discarded in the cesspit as well. The first to arrive were William H. Simmons II, age 22, his wife, Renata Mae Simmons, age 21, and their toddler son, William H. Simmons III, just 20 months old. Reports state Ronald shot the 2 adults in the dining room, then covered their bodies with coats and blankets, leaving them draped across the dining table. The infant was strangled and drowned, then placed in the trunk of a car parked behind the Simmons home. Shortly after, Ronald's 24-year-old daughter Sheila arrived with her husband, 33-year-old Dennis Raymond McNulty, and their 2 children, 7-year-old Sylvia and 21-month-old Michael. As they stepped inside, they took a few cautious steps before freezing in horror at the sight of the neatly arranged corpses lined up in a row. And just as he had done before, Ronald then unleashed his rage by shooting Sheila and Dennis. But the nightmare didn't end there. Grabbing their tiny 21-month-old son, he strangled the helpless child to death in a heartless act that defies comprehension. Once the boy was lifeless, Ronald callously dragged the little body outside and tossed it into a muddy patch, as if trying to erase the innocent life in the most degrading way possible. But Ronald's merciless fury wasn't finished. He then strangled Sylvia, his supposed child, with Sheila, and kept her body with the others. Evidence later revealed that Ronald had arranged the bodies of his entire family in neat, orderly rows inside the lounge, a macabre tableau of death. Each corpse was covered with coats except for Sheila, who was draped in Rebecca Simmons' finest tablecloth, a grim and eerie detail. What's even more chilling is that he placed Sheila and Dennis's son's body in the trunk of his car and abandoned it in a spot notorious for discarded, broken-down vehicles. Ronald clearly believed the boy, being Dennis's son, was unworthy to decompose alongside the rest of the family, a disturbing insight into his twisted mindset. After committing this brutal act, Ronald drove to a Sears store in Russellville, where he collected Christmas gifts he had ordered for his family, gifts meant to symbolize love and joy, yet purchased by a man who had just destroyed his own bloodline. That same night, in an almost surreal juxtaposition, Ronald headed to a private club to drink and celebrate what he called his successful plan, as if he had just conquered a victory rather than committed mass murder. He returned home afterward, spending the rest of the evening and the following day drinking beer and watching television, his chilling calm contrasting sharply with the horror he had wrought. Yet Ronald's quest for vengeance was far from over. On the morning of December 28, 1987, he took his son Ronald Jr.'s car to a Walmart in Russellville, where he purchased yet another gun, preparing for the violent rampage that would soon follow. His first target was the Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons law firm, where Kathy Kendrick, the woman who had gotten him fired for sexual harassment, still worked. Wearing a cowboy hat as a crude disguise, Ronald stormed in, and the office echoed with the terrifying sound of Kathy's screams, followed by a gunshot. She died before help could arrive, and at that time, Ronald's identity as the shooter remained unknown. Ronald's rampage didn't stop there. Next, he attacked the Taylor Oil Company, where he wounded Russell Taylor, the owner of the Sinclair Mini-Mart from which Ronald had recently resigned. During the chaos, he also shot and killed James Jim Chaffin, a fireman and part-time truck driver for Taylor Oil, the only victim in the spree who was a stranger to Ronald. After missing another employee, Ronald left the building and made his way to the Sinclair Mini-Mart, where he shot and wounded Roberta Woolery and David Saylor. His final stop was the Woodline Motor Freight Company, where he found his former supervisor, Joyce Butts, and shot her in the head and chest, seriously wounding her. In a chilling moment, he then took worker Vicki Jackson at gunpoint into the computer office and ordered her to call the police, demanding her to tell them, "I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me."
9 more bodies found this morning in Dover. The victims may be the wife, children, and grandchildren of the gunman. The toll now stands at 16 dead in an Arkansas murder case.
The police investigation took a dark turn when officers searched Ronald's home and discovered the bodies of 14 family members hidden inside. The horror stunned the entire community. Ronald was sent for psychiatric evaluation, but doctors declared him sane, meaning he knew exactly what he was doing. It later emerged that Becky, his wife, had been secretly saving money to leave him, and she was not alone. Their 3 oldest children, all adults, were working together to help her escape. In a handwritten letter to her son William, Becky called herself a prisoner. "Dad has had me like a prisoner," she wrote. "Every time I think of freedom, I want out as soon as possible." Her letters spoke of loneliness, fear, and a dream of simple joys, like having a phone, going to church, or seeing her children anytime she wanted. She even called him Fatso in letters she never dared to send, and told Sheila she didn't want to give him anything, not even pity. Friends of Loretta said she knew her mom wanted to leave, but feared she couldn't support the kids. Becky hoped Loretta would live with her brother Ronald Jr. in San Antonio, far away from the nightmare at home. Her siblings noticed it too. Becky's sister said Ronald got stranger and stranger every year. Her brother said Ronald had turned their home into a prison. After the incest came out, Ronald lost control. The family avoided him, and the respect and fear was gone. That's what broke him. One chilling clue sealed it. A letter Ronald wrote to Sheila, enraged she had exposed him as the father of her child. "I will see you in hell," he wrote. When prosecutors presented that letter in court, Ronald snapped. He punched one in the face and lunged for a deputy's gun. The man who had controlled his family with fear couldn't control himself anymore. He didn't just want to destroy them, he wanted to make sure they never got away. During his first trial for the murders of Kathy Kendrick and Jim Chaffin, Ronald was found guilty on May 12, 1988, and sentenced to death. Remarkably, jury selection took less than 6 hours. On May 16th, Judge John Samuel Patterson sentenced him to death by lethal injection plus 147 years in prison. Ronald refused all rights to appeal, publicly stating, I, Ronald Gene Simmons Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal or in any way change this sentence. It is further respectfully requested that this sentence be carried out expeditiously. His refusal to appeal was unwavering as he faced his next trial for the murders of his 14 family members. On February 10, 1989, he was found guilty once more and again sentenced to death by lethal injection. To those opposing the death penalty, he coldly declared, "In my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." The court held a hearing and ruled that his decision to waive further proceedings was both knowing and intelligent. Ronald's case even reached the United States Supreme Court in Whitmore v. Arkansas after another death row inmate, Jonas Whitmore, tried to force an appeal on Ronald's behalf. Whitmore and Reverend Louis Fraun argued that Ronald's refusal to appeal threatened the appellate rights of other inmates, but by a 7-2 vote, the Supreme Court rejected this effort. Due to ongoing legal wrangling, Ronald's execution was delayed, and he spent his time on death row, isolated from other prisoners who constantly threatened his life for refusing to appeal and damaging their chances to beat death sentences. On May 31, 1990, Governor Bill Clinton signed Ronald's second execution warrant, setting his death for June 25, 1990, the fastest execution after sentencing in U.S. history since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Ronald refused all visitors, including lawyers and clergy, choosing to face death alone. His final words were chilling and deliberate. "Justice delayed finally be done is justifiable homicide." No family members claimed his body, and Ronald was buried in a pauper's plot at Lincoln Memorial Lawn in Varner, Lincoln County. Now, for those of us who've been covering true crime stories for a while, this one truly hits different. It's not just the number of victims. It's the haunting details, the twisted mindset, and how unbelievably small the reason behind it all was. You can't help but wonder, could someone have stopped this before it spiraled into one of the worst family massacres in history? Was there a moment, a sign, a cry for help that was missed? Ronald's death, by all accounts, felt like justice finally being served. But then there's that one detail that always sends chills. The idea that a father could actually father a child with his own daughter. I mean, what would you do if you ever heard of something that horrific happening around you? Would you report it, step in, or would fear and disbelief hold you back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.